So yeah, thank you very much for attending, everyone. What we scheduled here is an open panel discussion talking about the topics that were brought up earlier about transitioning from Rockwell automation control systems to a CODESYS-based system. And there's we at CODESYS Corporation, here we get often questions from our US customers. How do we transition from our existing Rockwell solution to a CODESYS-based system, especially if we want to utilize things like the virtual PLC that was presented yesterday. Long story short, I would like to, we have the experts here to talk about those transitioning. I know, Paul, especially you and your tool, you have long years of experience with helping customers to transition from Rockwell and Siemens systems to CODESYS. So I would just open with a question here to you, Paul. What is driving system integrators or plant operators to replace an old Allen Bradley system or a Siemens controller system with CODESYS solutions?
I think from overarching umbrella idea is being beholden to or being forced into a certain mold within those companies. So for example, in the Rockwell world, you kind of got to stay within the Rockwell world with a lot of your hardware, software, everything that's involved. So the idea of being able to have with CODESYS, we have what's the last count, Markus? 500 vendors of hardware or more, and the ability to have that choice is fantastic. Now, this became very evident during COVID. What happened during COVID is a lot of those other companies had some significant supply chain issues, and so they companies that need equipment tomorrow are now being told they have to wait 8 months to be able to buy stuff. So now being in an open platform, open CODESYS platform, in all its variations has really made it a lot less risky in the long run. But you know what? When I was at Automate 2000 this year in Chicago, 2024. And I've said this many times. You guys have heard me say this. I was standing at the booth in the CODESYS booth with you guys, and people would come up, and I would ask them. I just start the conversation. I'd say, "Well, what do you have in your plant?" And it was really interesting. Their shoulders, a lot of times, their shoulders would slump, and they'd go, "Oh, I got Rockwell." And it was a matter of all the pain that goes along with having those systems in your plant. Well, for example, as I mentioned during my session, Slick is now obsolete. So Rockwell did that because they want to force you into a new platform. So it's all this forcing by Rockwell and I think to a lesser degree Siemens, but it's somewhat similar. So with our open platform, boy, we've got a lot of choice now.
And I think the other thing there is it's your IP, right? The hardware is such a minimal cost when you look at what we're trying to do as an integrator, as an OEM, as somebody that owns plants or factories. It's the code that's inside of there that really matters. And if you can only use that in one hardware platform, you're really limited, and you basically exposed yourself to what we saw with all those logistics issues, right?
To what Matt you just said, but we see our clients experiencing that exact issue with, I'm getting a new factory, I'm building it, but because this OEM only uses Rockwell, now I have to build my factory, balance of plant, and everything else around Rockwell. So I equate the tag wagging the dog is, you have an Apple iWatch, so I'm not an Apple person, obviously, but if you have an Apple Watch, that means I have to buy an iPad, I have to buy an Apple laptop, I have to buy Apple because that's the only way I can make it work. So it's we use the Google, I use the Android and the Apple analogy with clients all the time is that, do you really care if your application's running on a Samsung phone or a Motorola phone, or do you care if your spreadsheet's running on an HP or a Dell computer? No, you don't. But they certainly do that app has to run on that iPhone or it has to run in that compact Logix only. So, the choices to what Matt said with the supply chain, that really exasperated it. It really showed it that, yes, we only went to a Siemens or a Rockwell or a Schneider because they're big boys and we know that we can get their hardware and they stand behind it. And all of a sudden, the same vendors that the small guys in tier 2 and three are buying their chips from also had the same issues. So to a lesser extent, they tried to stock some of the stuff, but they had problems too. So it did not make them immune to it. So, we use the example if everybody got hit, if even all the CODESYS partners got wiped off the face of the earth, you could still take an industrial computer and load CODESYS, slap it on the DIN rail, and be off and running again.
And to Matthew's point as well, Mark, the same thing. The cost, I don't think people realize the significant difference in cost. So again, I'm being in Canada. So a year or two ago, a couple of years ago, I had a client call me, "Hey, can you price up a Rockwell PLC?" I'm like, "No, but okay." Anyways, I went to the distributor, and they're talking about $25,000 for an L85 in my area, and the L85. We have one of our partners on Logic is on this week with us, and I mean a phenomenal package to purchase. It certainly isn't $25,000. And guess what? What's really hilarious too is I always find this discussion hilarious. I always point out, and you can use multiple cores.
Yeah.
In an OnLogic PC, you can use multiple cores. And a Rockwell person will go, "Well, we have multiple cores too." And I said, "Oh, can you use them?" And no, they can't access them. They have no ability to access them. So we have actually, for significantly cheaper, much more powerful, much more available hardware. It's just profoundly different. It really is.
When you talk, Paul, about migration or even pricing new projects, clients are getting a wake-up call when they're able to take the handcuffs off and said, "Could you architect a system and so that we can go out for proposal and RFQ to other vendors, but what is the optimal design?" And we say, it's not just vanilla ice cream now.
Yes.
You can go and pick what you like. And what field bus do you prefer? Ethernet IP, Profinet, Modbus TCP, whatever field bus. Pick your IO structure. Who do you like? Do you like the partners? Do you like Wagos and Vipas and Weedmuller? What IO platform do you like? Pick that. Pick your field bus. Pick all your flavors that you like and your people understand, and you have the freedom to do that. And now you don't need ProSoft modules to communicate between different devices. You don't need gateways. You don't need special adapters. And all of that adds thousands and thousands of dollars on top of the design. And again, everyone likes to close the architecture, but when you really free your thinking and design a new plant from a maintenance perspective, it's a wake-up call for some. Now, granted, we might do that exercise and find this huge gap in pricing, and they still revert back to buying that iPhone, right? But again, we have to be able to present it, and I think it's a wake-up call. And a lot of the younger engineers and people that are more cognizant of budget and are responsible to their factories, their owners, and so forth, they make the right call.
Yeah, and it really is
All right.
helping future-proof, right?
Yeah.
If you're decentralizing, if you're taking the I/O off of the PLC, then you can upgrade that at any time. So if you need more processor power with
Yeah,
CODESYS, I can go get
don't
that.
buy a rack.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I can
don't
go
buy a
get that
rack.
to
Don't buy a
online.
rack. Don't buy a rack.
Correct, because you are decentralizing everything there. And the other thing we've talked about is the fact you can run other applications on that same device, that same hardware. So now instead of a PC just to send data to the cloud, it's coming out of the same PC you're using to run your logic. It really does make it a better process.
And do a pricing and just say, look, we have 5 or 10 guys that need a copy of the programming tools. How much is that going to cost? So when you get a $60,000 price tag quote versus here's free.
Yeah.
Well,
Plus, then you
yeah,
have the annual maintenance.
we all know the annual maintenance that we've seen that from Rockwell. I used to spend, even when I was by myself, I had to spend $7,000-8,000 a year, and the software would just die after the year. You didn't buy it and that version was good forever. You bought it and you only had a year to use it. If you didn't pay the Rockwell tax after the fact, you were stuck, right?
And I'm sorry, we hammer on Rockwell because it's the easiest to do, but as you know, an ex-solution provider, we lived it, right? And we sold it, and we've drank the Kool-Aid, and so is Paul. He lived it. So, but again, they're not the only ones. There's Siemens and Schneider. That most of these other manufacturers are trying to follow in suit, right? Because it's a great revenue source, But I think that in the long run, clients understand that that's not the right way to go for them.
All right. Thank you, Mark and Matthew, for your insight here. One question I have here is, what's when you're actually talking about migrating from a Rockwell or a Siemens system, I just keep mentioning both here because it's pretty much the same picture. Do you have anyone who actually is looking forward to implement some of the features that are available in CODESYS that are not available in Rockwell or Siemens, like, for example, object-oriented programming?
Yeah, I'll just my 2 cents worth. I mean, there's it's hilarious when you talk to Rockwell and Siemens people and you say, well, we've got in CODESYS, we've got object-oriented programming. So, well, we've got that too. Because a Rockwell person will say, I've got AOIs. Isn't that object-oriented programming? It's like, no, no, you haven't seen the vast array of tools that are available in object-oriented programming. It's outstanding. So that onto itself is just light years beyond what you would see in those older other platforms.
Also, the field buses, right? You're open to so many field buses and communication with devices that with Rockwell are going to obviously, or Siemens, cost you more money and add more complexity to your programming, right? You've got to look at it and say, can I do all this with one coding platform, or do I have to have 3 or 4? And really, we're seeing a lot more where they want to use the visualization to do a standalone product, right? We're making these things into appliances. For us, our agency, we want to sell an appliance. I don't want you to have to program it. I want you to have to configure it. And if the web server is built in, the trending is built in, the alarming is built in, all to that product, it's a much easier sell, and it's a much easier thing for a customer to adopt into their own system.
Yeah, I think if you had a client that would list out, objectively list out all the things and wants they would want to have, like Matthew was saying, object-oriented programming, some web servers, these hardware agnostic functions, but being able to have local data logging, all this stuff localized in a distributed environment. You're going to kind of find that to do that in these other platforms is a significant amount of third-party sourced comm gateways, data logging modules. Everything has a license and a price, and goes in the rack and becomes more and more of an anchor to get themselves out of it. So, the more cards that you put in that proprietary rack, when you need to exit that system, becomes harder and sticky for you to get away. And they know that, but from a client in a new architecture, building a new plant, in addition to their facility, those are things you really have to take a look at. Do you really want to do that? Because once that's there, it costs you a lot of money going in, and it's going to cost you even more coming out.
Do you see customers asking for retrofits or new projects more often, or even maybe a mix of both technologies?
It's a mix with us right now.
Yep.
But with any retrofit though, there's so many other things to take into account, right? I mean, Paul's got a part of that where we can do some of the conversion right away, but you've also got to look at what the process is doing, what it's interfacing with, the other communications that are out there, and then if they have an overall SCADA system, that's what Mark and I have talked about at length now, is how do we come up with a good way to convert that piece of hardware in their SCADA system without having to redo the entire thing. And that's becoming more and more prevalent, where they've got a legacy SCADA system. They want to keep some type of monitoring, and they don't want to have to wholesale change the whole thing out.
So it's almost, we have to develop a roadmap guidebook for planning this process, that it's not just, hey, I can take and convert your code and let me convert your IO. It's looking at all the different pieces of the plant and system that's touching that. Are there databases reaching into data points in the processors and things like that in a much higher batching system or things like that? So it's mapping all those touch points, and then kind of how do we replicate those in the conversion design process.
Yeah, it's almost a holistic approach, right? Just looking at whole package and seeing well, the goal is, to try and reduce the risk in converting. So somebody comes to you and has a slick project and wants it converted. As we were talking the other day, with maybe SCADA attached or whatever, how do we do all these components to it? And absolutely, the goal would be, hey, take that PLC off the wall, plug this one in over lunch, and away you go. Right? That's the hope. Of course, there's going to be realistic things that happen, things that you've got to deal with, and so on. So, Mark, you're 100% correct. Look at the whole picture and see what's there.
Go ahead, Mark.
That's no different than, if this was a Siemens guy trying to upgrade a Rockwell or vice versa. But more importantly, the whole process, even if it's just Rockwell has that same issue. This is no different, because if they have to upgrade a SLIC, and they're talking to an N7, they have to come through a migration process to get it to this newer compact control or whatever platform they use. So it's no different in a migration process, that nothing's 100%. It's like Paul said, it's not rip this off the wall and stick it on. Even from their aspect of it, there's a conversion and planning process that needs to happen.
Well, in the ones that we've had the best success with have not been Rockwell, or they using Rockwell and they're using a Modbus communication protocol. Yeah. So the great thing about CODESYS is we can line up the Modbus registers to be exactly like the old system. So, Marcus, we have in several occasions ripped it off the wall, put a new one in, plugged it, and started communicating. Oh yeah, the customers, everybody, this is the greatest thing ever. But a lot of things had to fall into place for that to be accomplished.
Yeah, right. Yeah, absolutely.
That actually leads me to the next question that I had here on my list here. What are the biggest obstacles that you're seeing there for the conversion, or for someone in not just for the code conversion, but just migrating from a Rockwell to a CODESYS system?
I mean, it's all those pieces we just said, right? And that's, I think, with Paul, Mark, and I, and his other partners for this, you really have to have somebody that understands it holistically. It's going to be very unlikely there's going to be one machine with no HMI just out there that we can convert and it's done, right?
And it even starts at the IO level, right? It's planning the legacy 115 volt AC input cards, and how do you take that? Not too many people make those anymore, right? So there's not a very clean process in some cases. So it's planning IO, it's planning that migration upwards, and and speaking with the client saying, how do we get rid of this if it doesn't make sense to you? How do we change it to something different? And what are all those things? So it starts at the very low end and works its way up the tree in the process. So there's hurdles all along the way, but it's, as long as, like Matt and Paul were saying, as long as the partner is experienced and understands it, not just from a CODESYS perspective, but the whole overall holistic solution, you're okay, right? But you need to have the big picture of it all.
Right. That's why we are really happy to work with you. It's with the experience of both systems and how to make it work with CODESYS on. And I really appreciate you being here today and giving us your input here. When it comes to obstacles, are there more organizational things that you've been looking into? I mean, when you're, what first comes to my mind is that in a plant, usually all the operators are trained on a specific system. So you would probably have to retrain the personnel unless you really replicate the user interfaces one-to-one.
But even with the user interfaces are great, but then you've got the maintenance guys, right? So some of this is really having them understand CODESYS and know that there's tons of resources out there to even learn CODESYS on your own, which is pretty fascinating compared to any of the other softwares that are available, because most of those you're going to have to pay to learn them, right? You're going to have to pay to be trained even to program something. So
I think
all those happen.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but one good point you made there, and we've heard some objections because you talk about what are some hurdles. We've had objections from consulting firms, from end users. Well, I spec a Rockwell and the lesser amount Siemens or Schneider anymore, but I spec it because I know that I can get providers, integrators, local to support me. And, the discussion we have is oftentimes, looking at CODESYS, maybe that same integrator doesn't even know that he already knows CODESYS, right? Does he know Schneider version this? Does he happen to use this? And also guarantee that if you have a plant that has it, we'll learn it, they'll learn it, and they'll support you, because it's not foreign by any means, But I think that objection, we've heard that before and had to deal with, my people know my iPhone, right? Again, we know the iPhone. My wife doesn't want to change from the iPhone, and I can find someone to go to the Apple store. Well, that's not always the best solution for you in the long run. So,
well, and taking it back to the whole purpose of the conversion app that we have is to give you an intermediate step. So there's been, let's say, CODESYS traditionalists have said, well, it should be, why aren't you going straight to object-oriented programming right off the bat? And what we see in North America is there are places that big places, big automotive plants or whatever, where they have a lot of people that are trained on ladder logic. They have a lot of people trained on, let's say, Rockwell. Let's pick on Rockwell again. And so when we convert from Rockwell to CODESYS, that's why we have, especially in the SLIC world, we still have the N files, the I files, and so on, because they might have 50 maintenance people that are used to these data points that are inside the PLC, and you don't want to just wipe that off the face of the earth right off the bat. So we're giving them a transition. Once they get it in CODESYS, now they can start employing some of these, extra features and tools, the significant difference, things that you can add to it. But at least it gets them in there without having to really go through a huge training, initially a huge training thing, because things stay the same, relatively speaking. And again, why we use ladder? Why we're doing in kind. If we see ladder logic, we convert to ladder logic. If we see structured text, we convert to structured text. So that gives them the interface that they were used to from a maintenance perspective. That's the point.
Yeah, I'm an electrical engineer by trade, so I actually the first programming in IEC61131 that I was working with was ladder logic, and I still to the day I see some really good use cases for it. But what I see is that most of those systems are limiting it to just using one language, versus CODESYS allows you to mix and match for different purposes, different parts of your application. And I don't know if you've been using that as well in your applications, or
I think Paul started a whole LinkedIn debate over that, right? What's the best?
Yeah, I get into trouble. Hey,
Yeah,
you know what? Ladder logic's got its use.
Such a big deal over that.
But it's militant. Like Mark and Matthew, you can attest to this. North America is militantly ladder logic. Even to your point, Marcus, even in the case, like the worst one for me is PID loops. Why would anybody want to do a PID loop in a ladder logic rung? It's just horrible. But you know what? That's in the Rockwell world, that's the way it's done, right? Yeah. So for us in CODESYS, it's sort of a breath of fresh air to give you that ability to go away from that if you want to, or it's there if you want it. But yeah, they're militantly ladder logic. They really are. It's hard. Sometimes it's a hard sell.
Yeah, and with the new ladder editor, that should help out some.
I think so.
It looks closer to what they're expecting to see. But it's also training and education. If they're actually doing any kind of high-level programming, they'll figure out really quick that ST is a much better for certain things. Ladder still gives you some good visualization. So if you got guys trying to troubleshoot it, they still understand that a little better in context, I guess.
Here's the real funny thing about it. So I'm gonna go all the way back from before I had gray hair. So there is a day before ControlLogix. The history is Rockwell bought a company called Reliance Electric. Reliance Electric actually had a controller, a PLC called the Automax, and the Automax had multiple languages in it, right? And it was a drive systems controller that we would use in paper mills and steel mills and big applications, right? And in there, the engineering group, they would use structured text, they would use ladder logic, they would use function block. They appropriately used it. So the funny thing was, it was really funny for me coming from the Reliance world, seeing that disbursement of technology going into the Rockwell world, and they made this. Well, look what we made. We made this controller called ControlLogix. And to me, it was an Automax. It's more of an Automax than it ever was a PLC5. So for me, I see all these parts to it that were Automax, but nobody in Rockwell would ever use them because they were stuck on that PLC5 slick mentality. It's only ladder logic. So again, it's that militantly ladder logic approach. And hey, you know what? You sold me. I was sold 30 years ago on multiple languages. So.
All right. Yeah, thank you. One of the other questions that come up often with the conversion is there's that XML format from the PLC Open that is somewhat supported by other manufacturers as well. What do you think about that? Is that one way to a tool that you can use to migrate from one to the other?
Yeah, we use with our conversion software, we use certain interfaces into CODESYS to be able to rewrite the program. Basically, we're rewriting the program in CODESYS for you. We're just typing really quickly, right? So it's essentially what we're doing. And we use various interfaces that are available. These are all interfaces that are available. I mean, there's the C interface to CODESYS as well. There's Python interface to CODESYS. There's a bunch of different interfaces. So the PLC open standard or open interface is just one part of that for sure.
Okay. Yeah, I guess we already covered my last one of my questions here, where if I'm in a a plant operator, and I'm considering, all right, I want to try new technologies. How do I get help? How do I get started? And I guess you already mentioned earlier that the best way to get started is to get a partner who has experience with a migration path and can help with mitigating all those obstacles that you're going to run into, hardware, software, logistics, and so on. Is there anything else on that topic that you would like to add?
I personally want to reiterate. So I want to go back to my partners. So the partners, Mark and Matthew and David. Everybody, I can't tell you how much experience these guys have. I am not. I didn't just loosely, connect with them to do this. These guys have significant experience, and I just want to point out that if you need help going forward with any conversions or migrations, absolutely don't hesitate to contact them, contact myself, contact CODESYS. Absolutely. Since I've become a number of years back, became a systems partner, I've been really impressed with the depth of knowledge and capabilities that we have amongst us. And so Mark and Matthew, these guys are fantastic resources for you. So don't hesitate to contact them.
Yeah, and as he mentioned, we're looking at it with a holistic approach, from starting at I/O, what exactly do we need, making sure that crosses properly, and then up to how are you interfacing with it? Is it going to be a SCADA interface? And a lot of this, you want to do an upgrade, not just to upgrade. You want to do an upgrade to hopefully get access to better, right?
Yeah.
So are we wanting
Absolutely.
to do cloud database now? Are we wanting alarming that's different? What new features and functions do we need to add? And
Virtual CODESYS.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's why you want to bring that's why you want to bring in the system partners, because we've done it, and hopefully we can guide you in the right direction to make it as painless as possible.
Right. And it's really, trying to kind of plan that, what is the flavor that really works the best for you? The vanilla, chocolate, strawberry, for what field bus works, the most for your factory? What does it work for your industry, right? If you're, do you need DNP3 support? Do you need to have, Ethernet IP only or Modbus TCP? Does Profinet come into the play? Having the flexibility to pick them, that's wonderful. Now, which one do you want to standardize on? And do you have IO? Those are all, it's part of that basic planning process that, we still have clients today that are, still putting more IO on ControlNet, right? Or things. So it's like, you're spending money, putting yourself deeper into a hole that you have to eventually dig yourself out of. So when comes the point that that's not the right dollar to be spent? It's just it's throwing it in a hole that eventually you have to spend $2 to get back out of. So that's just, it's part of every process design. I know that's a simple thing. Let me just throw one more on. That's just getting a partner that can help you make financial decisions. What's the right path from any hardware, agnostic mode of operation? Say, look, this is the core engine, and I use the analogy. Do I care where my spreadsheet operates in? Is it a Dell computer, an HP computer, whatever? Does it work equally well? And what's the best solution for you?
Well, and Mark and I came to CODESYS. We both were using a product that ran Isograph, which is unfortunately a Rockwell software.
That's right.
Also. And
yeah, I started with Isograph too.
But it's funny. It's funny going back to what Paul said. Rockwell, I was there. We were a solution provider at the time. I was there when Rockwell purchased iTriplex. Didn't even know that they acquired an IEC61131 platform. They were out to buy the triplex system for the oil and gas market, and acquired a platform that was really powerful, but didn't know that they even had it, and probably wouldn't use it if they really knew they had it, because, like Paul said, that the Automax had this technology, but since ICS triplex Isograph has been relegated to component edition now, right? It's the lowest of the platform.
And basically all the IP we had put in over the last 15 years was in a snap. So when him and I, were crying over this, we said, well, what are we going to do next? And CODESYS was the most logical. And now we're developing blocks. Paul's got all these blocks developed with the conversion that we can reuse. And going out there to the CODESYS store, there's a lot of IP that's there and available, sometimes for free download. Right.
I think that's a good point. Back to that is, we're now taking, and that was a decision why CODESYS was such a good solution for everybody, is that now the intellectual development, property development that we're doing is we spend that dollar and we're developing for the utility market, for industrial HVAC, for water, wastewater, food and beverage. When we develop a block, it's now not married to a vendor's hardware. It's agnostic to whatever hardware, field bus, whatever that client needs, but that code is running now somewhere that we can make it portable. Do you have Profinet as your field bus or Ethernet IP as your field bus? My block doesn't care. My software doesn't care. What drive you're running, what IO you're running, doesn't care. So, and what processor you're running, really, frankly, it doesn't matter. So if we're going to invest the dollar in the intellectual property to create an object that does some whiz-bang unique thing, now I can really recoup that investment over multiple installations.
Yeah, it's a brave new world.
Yeah, but we find that objection because, like I said, the one client in food and beverage, his largest OEM of piece of mechanical equipment for their process uses Rockwell, so that was steering their boat because that vendor had developed their AOIs and whatever around Rockwell. And they can't move from it.
All right. One other question that comes up pretty often is how do we have all our old IO that we want to keep. We don't care about the processor. How easy or how complicated is it to switch out a controller and without replacing all the IO? I think you talked a little bit about it before, but
depend on what they have, right? If it's rack based, you're not going to do a whole lot with it. There are some interfaces you can tie into those racks and make them remote IO now. But I think that's where we sit down with that customer, and you're going to have to go through logically what is the best option here, and do you want to rely on that old IO that could fail and you can't get a replacement for it? So if it is a rack, you do lose one IO card, you can't replace that IO card. You're in the same boat. Right.
But we have, honestly, we have done it in a phased approach with clients too, right? So, hey, they just don't have the budget. They can't afford that large price tag that hit them with $250,000 to upgrade a couple of racks of IO. So here's a happy midpoint to convert the processor. You have a soft processor now, soft PLC processor that's running the code, and now you can then migrate the IO at a future time, buy spare parts, or you have spare parts, and then plan for it. But at least you've moved away in the right direction.
Well, and here's another interesting approach to it. There was a client that we're working with, my team's working with, and they have a significant amount of Rockwell install base right now, and they're still growing and adding machines to their systems, and their OEMs are still using Rockwell and still giving them a Rockwell, but they want to transition over to CODESYS. So a great example was, well, they had this ControlLogix rack that they would use in their machines on a regular, cookie cutter. This was their regular machine. And I said to them, well, wait a second, let's do this. Why don't you just scrunch that down to just the processor from a Rockwell perspective, and then do field bus, plan field bus beyond that. Yeah, right. Now, if you do want to actually pull that processor out, you don't have to worry about all the local IO and all the cards that are in there. Now you could just switch over. It almost makes it hot swappable to Matthew's point earlier. Hey, this is
you
like
don't
this
need to rewire.
Swappable. Yeah. So,
and it's a great way of testing if the proof of concept. If they don't believe you that CODESYS works, no problem. Let's plug it into here today, and if you're having it, plug it right back.
Yep, it's an easy way to do it.
Excellent. Well, thank you, everyone. I think Chris popped up here because we're running out of time.
There he is.
Thanks, Chris, for the reminder to look at the clock. Yeah, thank you, everyone, for your participation here today. And I'll give it back to Chris.